edukacyjną, wiem, bo ja też byłem prodziekanem i dziekanem. Więc proszę Państwa, bardzo serdecznie dziękuję, że Państwo się skontaktowali.
Moda.
Dobra,
Mogę tak?
The best.
Już? Zaczynamy?
15 sekund.
Dobrze. So, distinguished professors, honored guests, dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on this year's Oxford debate, Accountability of Constitutional State Organs in the Context of Rule of Law Crisis. Standing here today carries a special personal significance for me as I return to the university that shaped my academic development. It's both an honor and a joy to moderate this event as a graduate of this institution. Now, I continue my academic journey as a PhD student at the Deák Ferenc Doctoral School of Law at the University of Miskolc, and the junior researcher at the Central European Academy in Budapest. It's now my honor to give the floor to the leader of the Polish team, Professor Marcin Wielec, Vice Dean for Student Affairs and Head of the Department of Criminal Procedure. Professor, the floor is yours.
Faculty of Law and Administration in our University of Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński in Warsaw. This debate organized with the Polish-Hungarian Professors Network, coordinated by the Central European Academy in Budapest. At the beginning of my speech, I want to send a very warm welcome of our friends from Hungary and other participants from Central Europe, from Romania, Croatia, and Macedonia. The delegation from the Central European Academy in Budapest is here with us. Let's welcome very warmly the captain of the Central European team, Professor János Ede Szilágyi. And welcome the program director in Central European Academy, Dr. Katarzyna Zombory. I also want to thank you that Madam Vice Rector, Professor Anna Fidelus, for her patronage in this event. I appreciate Madam Rector. And simultaneously, I welcome the brave debaters from both teams, Poland and Central Europe. I also welcome everyone watching us online because our debate is broadcasting on a YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, for our faculty, today is a special day, as always, by the occasion in the International Scientific Event. But our university and the Central European Academy in Budapest, we are connected by more than just this debate. Because we are connected by the Polish-Hungarian Professors Network, of course, the beautiful cards of our fruitful cooperation and beautiful friendship between us. And recently, that we are connected by a newly signed letter of intent of cooperation. This is a really strong foundation to build scientist bridges between our nations in science, especially, of course, in law science. Before we start, let's think for a moment. We meet here today for legendary Oxford debate. This tradition started in the 19th century in the famous Oxford Union. The idea was simple. The dispute is not about destroying the other person. It is a tool to find it through. It was a fight by words and logic thinking. In our debate, ladies and gentlemen, three things are important: strong argument, elegant style, and respect for opponent. Remember, yes indeed, today is a big competition, but above all, it is a beautiful festival of pure academic dialogue. This is development of cooperation, foundation in the relations in science. In this way, let's look at our topic today. Very interesting in my point of view. accountability of constitutional state organs in the context of the rule of law crisis. This is not just academic theory. This topic, ladies and gentlemen, my dear students, touches the beating heart of the modern democracy. Today, our speakers will face fundamental questions. First, looking inside, how do we ensure responsibility in the state? Is the first. Are our laws enough when institutions are in crisis? And the second, looking outside. What is the role of international law? Are the cards in Strasbourg, Luxembourg, the final guardians, or do they interfere with the state independence? These are the big dilemmas. These are very complicated challenges, the analysis of which belongs only to the brave scientists. Therefore, in my opinion, is worth quoting Robert Schuman, one of the founding fathers of European Union. He said, "World peace cannot be kept without creative efforts that match the dangers." Today, this danger is the visible crisis of the rule of law. And your task, these students from Poland and Central Europe, is make this creative effort. You must find answer for the 21st century. But one thing is equally essential as well. Remember where we are. This is the proud Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University. Our legendary patron, in difficult communist time, told us, short and very loud, to be brave. Simply, to be brave. He said, "Only eagles fly above the cliffs and are not afraid of storms. You must have something of eagles in you, an eagle's heart and an eagle's eyes for future, for our future." So, in this way, be like an eagle. Do not be afraid of difficult questions. Look into the future. In this way, dear participants, Polish team and Central European team, before this hall becomes an arena, I want to say to you, thank you. I know you worked very hard for weeks. Thank you to the captains, Professor Szilágyi, for effort, preparation for the team and brave, and thank myself, my humble person, at the same as a captain of the Polish team. But you, our proud students from Poland and Central Europe, today are the hero of the day, hero of the event. Just standing here is already a victory. It is the time for action. You have a noble fight ahead of you. Your weapon is a word, your shield is logic, and your strategy is a personal culture. Fight for your arguments with passions, like through gladiators of science and through. Really, you are waiting for your intellectual fire. And in this way, ladies and gentlemen, let the 5th International Oxford Debate begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wielec. And with a great honor, I would like to invite the leader of the Central European team, Professor Janusz Ede-Szilágyi, professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Miskolc and the Strategic Director of the Central European Academy in Budapest. Please welcome Professor Janusz Ede-Szilágyi.
Dear professors, dear colleagues, thank you so much for this opportunity. We are, and I am, honored that our team can be here in your university, university led by a renowned professor and providing very, very high standards, not only here in Poland, but also at international level. I'm really glad that in this way we can continue our cooperation with your university and with your professors and students. We have so many programs for you as students. We have a specific PhD program, specific LLM programs, and we established journals and also book series for the Polish law. We provide scholarships in which you can be participated And in this way, I hope that the present moment is not the last one, but only a period in our nice cooperation. And I am look forward to meeting you in our other programs and projects. Please do not forget to visit our website, on which you can find our programs details. And now I would like to grab the opportunity to express my gratitude to the UKSW organizing this high-level event. I would like to express my gratitude to my colleagues, of course, Professor Marcin Bielec, also Professor Paweł Sobczyk, taking into account that they helped us organize this event. If I may, I would like to express my gratitude to Bartłomiej Orężak. Unfortunately, now he cannot be here, but I am aware of the situation that he was also a very important person to launch the present event. Last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude, of course, to the young generation. Now they are in the debate. Be elegant, and I wish a fruitful and nice debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor. So now it's my pleasure to move forward and officially open today's debate. We are joined by two outstanding teams whose perspectives, grounded in research and academic experience, will contribute to a deeper understanding of the pressing issue. So allow me now to introduce the teams. So we begin with the Central European team. I am pleased to introduce one more time the team leader, Professor János Ede Szilágyi, professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Miskolc and strategic director of the Central European Academy in Budapest. Let's move to the Central European team. I'm honored to present the esteemed members. So, Weronika Pietras, she is from Poland. She completed her master's degree in law at the University of Rzeszów in 2023, where she was actively involved in academic life, chairing 2 student scientific clubs and participating in ELSA Rzeszów. She is currently a third-year PhD student at the Ferenc Deák Doctoral School of Law of the University of Miskolc and a junior researcher at the Central European Academy. Her research focuses on constitutional and parliamentary law, reflected in her doctoral thesis, and she regularly takes part in scientific conferences and study trips. Now, please welcome Elizabeth Zsófi Szabó. She is from Romania and earned her bachelor's and master's degrees at the Sapientia Hungarian University of Transylvania. She's completed the Deák Ferenc Human Rights and Rule of Law LLM and is now pursuing another LLM at Bécs-Bolyai University. She has a strong academic record, including participation in major moot court competitions and multiple awards at scientific students' conferences. Zsófia is currently a first-year PhD student at the Ferenc Deák Doctoral School of the University of Miskolc and the junior researcher at the Central European Academy. Her research focuses on human rights risks posed by artificial intelligence, particularly regarding second-generation rights. Now, please let me introduce Bojan Petrovski. He is from Macedonia. He graduated his bachelor's studies in law at the Saint Clement of Ohrid University in Bitola in 2021, and his Master of Law studies in constitutional law at the Saint Cyr and Methodius University in Skopje in 2023. He also finished the Deák Ferenc LLM studies in human rights and the rule of law in 2025. Currently, he is a first-year PhD student at the Deák Ferenc Doctoral School of Law of the University of Miskolc and the junior researcher at the Central European Academy. He is researching topics related to a constitutional law, especially the sovereignty and constitutional identity in the contemporary age, but also other constitutional and international law topics, such as human rights, the rights of national minorities, parliamentary law, and etc. He has written several scientific articles on the mentioned topics and has presented at several international scientific conferences in his home country and abroad. He has also been included in various projects and activities. Last but not least, please welcome Mateo Verban. He is from Croatia. He earned his master's degree in law at the University of Osijek, where he was an active member of the Osijek Pro Bono Legal Clinic. After graduation, he gained several years of professional legal experience. He later completed the Deák Ferenc LLM in International and Comparative Children's Rights. Mateo is now a first-year PhD student at the Deák Ferenc Doctoral School of Law and the junior researcher at the Central European Academy. His research focuses on the legal evaluation of fatherhood and workplace discrimination in the context of parental rights, and he actively participates in academic conferences and research initiatives. So this concludes the introduction of the Central European team. So now let us turn our attention to the opposing team, so the Polish team, whose members are also equally prepared to engage in the intellectual debate. So I am pleased to introduce one more time team leader, Professor Marcin Wielec, Vice Dean for Student Affairs and Head of Department of Criminal Procedure at the Faculty of Law and Administration of Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University. So now it's my great pleasure to present the member of Polish team. So let's start with Mrs. Faustyna Zabielska, is a fifth-year law student at the UKSW. She's an active member of the Medical and Pharmaceutical Law Student Research Group. At UKSW, Faustyna participates in numerous academic and student initiatives. Her interests include medical law and the protection of children's rights. She is also developing her skills in debate management, which is an important part of her professional career. Using her knowledge and experience, she engaged in charitable activities. Now, Wiktoria Zwolińska is a law student at the UKSW. She is actively involved in academic life, serving as a chair of the UKSW Student Council. She actively supports initiatives aimed at developing the academic community, combining her passion for social activity with concern for the needs of her colleagues. She develops her academic interest through her involvement in the Criminal Procedure Law Research Club, where she explores issues related to criminal law and court procedure. Now, please welcome Mateusz Kaznowski. He is a PhD student at the Doctoral School of UKSW. He is the former president of Substantive Criminal Law Scientific Association. He serves as the secretary of the board of the Doctoral Students' Parliament. His academic interests include broadly understood criminal law, both substantive and procedural. He is also a trainee attorney at law at the District Chamber of Attorneys at Law in Warsaw. Last but not least, Szymon Bizior. He's a student of law at the UKSW. He is the chair of the Financial Law Research Club and vice chair of the Civil Procedure Law at the European Union Law Research Clubs. He is interested in criminal law, civil law, and European Union law. So both teams stand ready to bring their arguments, analyses, and insights to the forefront of today's debate. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the formal presentation of the first part of our debate. So before we proceed, let me briefly outline the rules of today's debate. So each speaker will have 2 minutes to present their arguments, followed by the opposing speaker's response. I kindly ask all participants to respect the time limits and maintain the standards of academic debate. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now begin the first part of the debate, so dedicated to the domestic dimensions of accountability. So each topic will be presented by one speaker from each team, beginning in this part with Central European team, followed by the Polish team. So we will now shift focus on the main topic, so domestic accountability, constitutional, political, and criminal dimensions. So to start, I kindly ask you for your attention as I introduce the first speaker from the Central European team, who will present it and elaborate on the opening perspective, so constitutional and historical foundations of accountability. And let me introduce the question. How have European constitutional traditions shaped the idea of state organ accountability, and how are these principles tested in the current crisis? So, Central European team, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear opponents, dear professors, dear audience. European legal history has been developing the concept of accountable government since ancient times. Authors such as Aristotle and Cicero have been written about the need for accountability and the limitations of the government. The Magna Carta was one of the first limitations, was one of the first implementations of the principle of accountability in the Middle Ages. However, the period of the Enlightenment, the emergence of written constitutionalism, and the emergence of nation states were the main historical turning points for the establishment of the principle of accountability. The authors of this period had a strong influence on the affirmation of this principle. John Locke's idea that the separation of the ruled and rulers is needed for establishing the principle of public accountability, Montesquieu's separation of powers, Baldwin's theory of sovereignty, etc., had a strong impact in this manner. The concept of accountable state organs has found its place in written constitutions, primarily in Western European states, and also throughout Europe following the fall of communism. The division of powers, the checks and balances, the vote of confidence, the dissolution of the legislative body, etc., guarantee the limitations and accountability of the rulers. Accountability of the state is also explicitly mentioned in many constitutions. But did the legal provisions bring the accountability into practice? Despite the constitutional provisions, rulers often try to avoid accountability for their actions. When they establish control over the legislative and executive branches, political parties tend to control the whole system and not take responsibility for their deeds. To prevent this, it is of high importance for every society to preserve the free speech. In the age of internet and social media, the criticism of the public towards the actions of the state organs and politicians is a key to holding them accountable for their actions. Therefore, the role of the public in the contemporary age is crucial in improving the accountability of the state organs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, and now the Polish team will share their perspective. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear guests, dear audience, I think that there is no doubt that the European constitutional traditions have shaped the idea of accountability of state organs in at least three important ways. The conception of limited government, the separation of power, and also the protection of fundamental rights. First, in many European countries, constitutions emerged as a reaction against absolutism. They were meant to bind people, to bind people to the concept that no authority is irresponsible by the law. So this historical experience created the basic idea that every authority must be answerable, legally, politically, or both, for how it uses its powers. Second, the separation of powers and systems of checks and balances established institutional forms of accountability. So parliaments control the executive, courts review legality and constitutionality, and heads of the state may act as a guardian of the constitution. So in different ways, European models, from parliamentary monarchies to republican systems, all try to prevent concentration of power and to ensure that the organs can be called to account for their actions. And third, the rise of fundamental rights after the World War II added a new dimension. State organs must answer not only to other institutions, but also to citizens whose rights they may violate. So constitutional courts, ombudsmen, and human rights bodies become a key instrument of accountability. So today, these principles are being tested by several overlapping issues: polarized politics, populist narratives, emergency measures, and sometimes open pressure on the judiciary or constitutional review. In such conditions, formal mechanisms of accountability may exist on paper but be weakened in practice. So the real challenge is whether our constitutional traditions still have enough social and political support to function effectively, or whether they risk becoming just symbolic, and precisely in the moment that we need them most. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your analysis. So we will now proceed with the second speakers from each team, who will address the next aspect of our topic, parliamentary oversight and political responsibility. So let me introduce the question. So are parliamentary mechanisms sufficient to ensure accountability of the executive, or have they become symbolic under conditions of institutional imbalance? So Central European team, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear opponents, dear professors, dear audience. I think in a constitutional democracy, parliamentary oversight it is the most direct expression of popular sovereignty. Through parliament, the people exercise control over those who govern in their name. This is the very essence of democracy. That power must always remain answerable to the people. As Montesquieu taught, liberty depends on the separation of power, where each branch of government checks and limits the others. Parliament's role in this system is crucial. It not only makes laws, but also monitors, questions, and concentrates the executive. This mutual oversight keeps authority transparent, prevent the concentration of power. Political responsibilities differ from legal accountability. Is not relying on courts or sanctions, but on democratic judgment through debates, committees, and ultimately the vote of no confidence. A minister or government remains in office only so long as it retains the confidence of parliament and, by extension, of the people. But in a rule of law crisis, this mechanism is easily weakened. When a ruling majority dominates the legislature, oversight becomes a symbolic. The parliament ceases to check and turn into a shield of the executive. The balance of power collapses and democracy loses its self-correcting capacity. To review parliamentary oversight, it is therefore to protect democracy itself, to ensure that the people, through their representative, continue to hold power to account. Only then can a rule of law remain not an abstract principle, but a living practice of democratic responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your detailed analysis. So now, Polish team, you may now present your viewpoint, please.
Thank you very much, dear professors, dear guests, dear audience. Formally, the Polish constitution provides parliament with number of sufficient and powerful mechanisms for controlling and ensuring the accountability of executive branch. Constitutional control tools include, among others, the possibility of expressing a vote of no confidence to government or individual ministers, which is the strongest means of political accountability. In addition, members of parliament have the right to submit interpellations and questions, which is the basic tool for ongoing information control. Another crucial tool is the parliament's power to appoint investigative committees, which gives it board opportunities to examine specific cases of particular importance. Although the mechanisms are theoretically strong, their effectiveness can be problematic, as it mainly determined by the current balance of political power in parliament. In a situation when the parliamentary majority is closely controlled by executive, which is typical of most parliamentary systems, the use of strongest tools, such as a vote of no confidence, becomes politically impossible. In summary, although formally control is sufficient, in conditions of institutional imbalance, is often reduced to a tool for political debate by the opposition rather than real control. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive overview. So it's time for a third speakers from each team, who will present another perspective on our main topic, so judicial accountability and independence. And the question is, how can the judiciary remain accountable without compromising its independence, especially when courts are under political pressure? Central European team, please proceed.
Thank you. Dear opponents, dear professors, and dear audience, if we accept that accountability of state organs is foundational, one of the most sensitive areas is the relationship between judicial independence and judicial accountability. Independence is typically understood in two broad dimensions: institutional independence, which refers to judiciary as a whole being separated and free from the inappropriate influences of the executive and legislative branches, and individual independence, which refers to the ability of each judge to decide without improper interference and with appropriate safeguards. A third, often overlooked dimension is eternal independence, which aims to protect judges from the inappropriate pressures coming from the judiciary itself, such as senior judges or court presidents who may influence case outcomes or career progression. Yet, independence is not a license for unaccountability. Over-independence can separate courts from politics, while too strict accountability can risk subordinating the judiciary to the other branches. Judicial accountability encompasses multiple mechanisms: ex ante controls through rigorous appointment procedures based on merit and professional qualifications, ex post controls through appellate review, disciplinary proceedings, and in extreme cases, removal from the office. And we also have institutional controls through judicial council, transparency requirements, and public reporting obligations. The challenge in any crisis scenario is to preserve a balance and to ensure that judiciary can act fairly and without fear, while it remains transparent, reasoned, and accountable to both the Constitution and to the people. We can conclude that judicial accountability and independence are not opposing values, but complementary safeguards essential to the rule of law. When systemic accountability is weak, legal protection becomes fragile. We all depend on institutions that are independent and accountable. If those break down, rights become only promises. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful remarks. And Polish team, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. Responsibility and independence of the justice system are two values that must exist at the same time. Independence means that judges make decisions only based on the law and the facts, free from political pressure or the influence of other groups. But independence alone is not enough. The justice system should also be responsible to the society that trusts it to solve conflicts. Therefore, finding the right balance is very important. The justice system can stay responsible without losing its independence, mainly through transparency, clear explanation of court decisions, access to information about how courts work, and simple ethical rules help society and the media evaluate the quality of the courts' work without interfering with their decisions. Another important element is in the separation of powers. Parliament and the government may set the general rules for how courts function, but they must not interfere in decisions about individual cases. Courts in turn check whether state institutions act legally, and together with the Constitutional Court, they make sure that the legislative and executive branches do not exceed their powers. Finally, legal and civil culture is very important. Understanding that an independent judge is not without control, but controlled in a different way, professionally and fairly, not politically. The justice system can be both independent and responsible if it works openly, has non-political ways to hold judges accountable, operates within a balanced system of powers, and is supported by a culture that respects the law. Only then can it resist political pressure and protect the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you for your detailed response. So now we move to the final speakers for this topic, who will address the criminal law perspective, so criminal liability of constitutional state organs, and the question, under what conditions should high-ranking state officials face criminal responsibility for actions undermining the rule of law, and what limits should exist to protect constitutional order? Central European team, you may begin.
Thank you, Julia. Dear opponents, dear professors, and dear audience, the rule of law is a foundation of a democratic state and the constitutional order. It means, among other things, that all public authorities, including the highest-ranking state officials, act on a basis of the law and within its limits. Democratic standards assume that public authorities are accountable to the law and indirectly to society. Therefore, when the rule of law is violated by those holding the highest position in state, they may be held liable, including to criminal liability as well. As a rule, criminal liability comes into play when the action of officials constitute a crime under national or international law. Many countries have laws penalizing abuse of power, exceeding authority, of failure to fulfill duties by a public official. If this result, it's a serious violation of public interest of the law. An example of this is the typical criminal offense of acting to the detriment of the public interest by exceeding the powers of officials. All the above situations, if proven, should be in principle give rise to the possibility of criminal sanctions against those guilty, regardless of this position. The basis here is the idea that no one is above the law, and that holding public office does not guarantee immunity for unlawful actions. For the declaration of equality before the law to have real meaning, there must be procedures and institutions in place to bring high-ranking officials to justice, while respecting the constitutional order. In many democratic countries, constitutions provide for specific procedures for holding the highest authority accountable, such as impeachment. It's worth adding that although criminal law is mainly a state domain, the international community has created tools to erect a serious breaches of democratic values. Although these tools do not directly affect individual officials in criminal terms, it is an important mechanism for protecting the rule of law within the international legal structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive examination. And lastly, I invite the Polish team's final speaker for this topic. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In a state governed by the rule of law, even the highest officials, the president, prime minister, ministers, judges, and members of parliament should be subjected to criminal liability. However, due to their special rule, separate procedures and safeguards are necessary to prevent the misuse of criminal law as a tool of political struggle, while still allowing accountability. Criminal liability should not cover ordinary political mistakes or disputed interpretations of the law. It should arise when a high-ranking official knowingly violates the constitution or a statute or intentionally uses their office for actions contrary to the rule of law. To answer the question, what limitations should exist to protect the constitutional order in the context of imposing criminal liability on state authorities, one must certainly point to immunities that exclude liability for actions are undertaken within the scope and framework of performing official duties, and that require the consent of a specific body in order to initiate criminal proceedings against certain officials. Moreover, the highest officials should be held accountable for separate special procedures. This could include, for example, the operation of special bodies established to try individuals holding the highest state offices if they were to violate the constitution or statutes. Criminal liability of high-ranking officials makes sense only when the prosecution service is independent and judiciary operates independently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your detailed analysis. And with the 4 perspectives now delivered, we will proceed to the interactive segment of this part of the debate, so during which the teams may address questions to one another. As our guests today, the Central European team will begin by presenting their question to the Polish team. So, Central European team, the floor is yours.
Dear opponents, despite the strong guarantees of the accountability of the national institutions provided by the law, it is often stated that state institutions are not sufficiently accountable for their actions. How can the accountability be improved? And are the legal reforms set sufficient, or is anything else needed? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Improving the accountability of state institutions requires a multidimensional approach that goes beyond legal reforms alone. Here are several key aspects. Firstly, strengthening legal frameworks and procedures. Although the law may provide accountability mechanisms, their effectiveness in practice is often the problem. Secondly, transparency in the functioning of institutions. Openness in decision-making, procedures, and public spending enable society and the media to monitor state actions. Greater transparency creates pressure on institutions to act in the public interest. Attention should also be given to the role of oversight and independent institutions, bodies such as tribunals or ombudsman for citizen rights, as well as an active civil society and media. It is therefore important to educate citizens about their rights, procedures, and ways to report violations. In summary, legal reforms are an important step, but they are not enough. Thank you. And my question to you is social and civil oversight of power. What role do the media, non-governmental organizations, and public opinion play in the system of state accountability? And are there any oversight tools still effective in the face of the erosion of democratic standards? Thank you.
Thank you, dear opponents. The media and the NGOs play a crucial role in shaping public opinion, and consequently, their impact on holding the state institutions accountable for their actions is really huge. Their influence can modify the attitude of the voters and also motivate the electorate to support or oppose the government. In the age of mass media, which is highly influential, the oversight tools of the media and the NGOs are quite effective. Social media influencers also have an even larger impact in this manner, especially among younger generations. Theoretically, this can improve accountability. But who controls and finances the media and the NGOs, and even the social media influencers? Mass media are owned by wealthy businessmen who determine the way they function. That's why we have left-wing and right-wing media, which are at least partially biased. The same goes for the NGOs, but also for the influential social media personalities. Therefore, we can say that the media and the NGOs are important and efficient in improving the accountability of the national institutions, but what is more important is who stands behind them and what intentions do the people who control them have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you very much for your questions and answer. And before we continue with the next part of the debate, I would like to express my appreciation to both teams for their thoughtful presentations and the engaging exchange that concluded this first segment. And we will now take maybe 10 minutes break. So please take this time to relax and refresh. We look forward to resuming the debate shortly.
Let's get some rest. będzie do tworzenia.
Jakiś sonek szykujący wam. To tak patrzę.
Ja już nie jestem obrażona.
Nie,
Na
już
tak
nie?
sobie.
Oj tam.
Aha.
Ale widać, że
No, jak obrażać się? Musimy się szczęściem. No już z górki teraz, nie? Tak, najgorsze na pierwsze wypowiedzi, nie? No właśnie. A to wszystko z głowy trzeba mówić, nie? Zaskoczony będą mi zadać pytanie. Nie, właśnie. Ale ja wiecie też, to jest naprawdę, że wszystkie te bombki są niskie, nie? No. I człowiek patrzy z góry i od razu widać, że się patrzy, a jak ktoś jest niższy, to wiecie, to nie widać tej różnicy, nie? No nie warto, sztuczne kurczaki wtedy prowadzą.
Przepraszam.
Jak tam walka?
Pan widzisz?
O, krew się leje.
Oczy jest podwinne.
Tak. Nie. Teraz misja idzie ładnie. Najlepsze podstawy. My tu nie wiem, o czym my tu mówimy.
A. Ubezpieczam nas na Słowację i Czechy.
No to czekaj, bo mi się znowu wykonała.
jest coś w tym, a widać kobiecą rękę. Ale...
Co?
Piątka z procedury na pewno będzie na koniec.
Bardzo ładnie. Bardzo ładnie, naprawdę. Naprawdę. Trzeba radzić sobie, że stoicie, bo tego nie było w planie. Nie, to nie ma sensu.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to slowly begin the second part. So, welcome back after the short break. I hope that everyone is refreshed and ready to continue with the second part of our today's debate. We will now shift our focus to the second main topic, so external accountability, European and international dimensions. So please welcome first speakers from each team who will address the follow aspect of our topic, judicial enforcement of accountability in Europe. And the question is, how do the Court of Justice of the European Union and European Court of Human Rights define and enforce accountability of state organs? Are their interventions and safeguard of the rule of law, or do they risk crossing constitutional boundaries of member states? Polish team, you have the floor.
Thank you. So the European courts define accountability by making sure that states respect the legal commitments they accepted. So the Court of Justice of the European Union checks whether state organs follow European Union law, while the European Court of Human Rights reviews whether states respect the right protected by the European Convention on Human Rights. So both courts can hold national authorities responsible when domestic mechanisms fail. In this way, they often act as an external safeguard for the rule of law. Their decisions on judicial independence, access to justice, and human rights protections can strengthen international checks and balances. However, their role also creates tension. When these courts interpret broad constitutional principles, their judgments can influence how national institutions are organized. Some states argue that this may go beyond the powers they originally agreed to, and that it risks crossing their constitutional boundaries. So the key question is balance. External courts can defend the rule of law, but they must also respect the constitutional identity and limits of each member state. Only then can judicial oversight support rather than challenge the stability of national constitutional systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your perspective. And now, Central European team, please proceed.
Thank you, Julia. Dear opponents, dear professors, dear audience, the Court of Justice of the European Union and the European Court of Human Rights play a key role in enforcing the rule of law and the accountability of state authorities in Europe. Both courts define standards of state accountability and provide mechanisms for enforcing them above the national level. The basic mechanism of the CJEU is the infringement procedure. If an infringement is found, the CJEU orders its removal and may impose financial penalties for failure to comply with the judgment. The second key tool is the liability of the state for damages for violation of the EU law. The CJEU has defined the conditions for such liability, including that the EU rule infringed must confer rights on individuals. The infringement must be serious, and there must be a causal link between the infringement and the damage. The CJEU also strengthens compliance with EU law through the preliminary ruling procedure, ensuring a uniform and binding interpretation that national courts must apply. The European Court of Human Rights enforces the responsibility of CJHR member states mainly through individual complaints. If the court finds a violation of the law, it issues a judgment that is binding on the state concerned. The state is obliged to enforce the judgment, which includes paying compensation to the victim and taking criminal measures. The interventions of both courts guarantee respect for the rule of law. However, there are allegations that both courts are assuming powers that states have not conferred on them. Despite their different competences and procedures, both courts play complementary roles as guardians of state accountability in Europe. The CJEU ensures that EU member states are accountable for implementing EU law and respecting common values. The ECTHR, on the other hand, ensures that no Council of Europe member state evades human rights standards by holding governments accountable for the violation of individual rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this thoughtful presentation. So we will now proceed with the second speakers from each team, who addresses the next aspect of our topic, sovereignty, treaty obligations, and the limits of external control. And the question, how can international obligation be reconciled with the constitutional autonomy of states? When does external enforcement become interference in domestic governance? Polish team, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The problem of reconciling state sovereignty with its international obligations is one of the central issues of contemporary constitutional and international law. With the growing role of supranational organizations, states are increasingly subjected to external control mechanisms. In a world of interdependence and international integration, sovereignty is not absolute. However, every state, even when it's a member of international organizations, remains an autonomous entity. On the other hand, international oversight serves to protect common standards, especially when domestic mechanisms fail. External control is justified when it protects values that are a condition of membership, when it concerns an area that the state has consciously transferred, when it is proportionate and necessary, and when the state does not provide effective internal mechanisms. We can speak of excessive interference among other situations when an international organization exceeds its treaty-based powers, or it interferes with the core of a state's constitutional identity. It may also occur, for example, when external oversight weakens internal democratic legitimacy, meaning that decisions made outside the state have a real impact on its policies, despite not from democratically elected national authorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, Central European team, your response, please.
Dear opponents, dear professors, dear colleagues, The modern European legal order rests on a delicate balance between of the autonomy of nation-state and the oversight of supranational institutions. Yet sovereignty remains the constitutional foundation of Europe itself. Under Article 4 of the Treaty on European Union, the Union must respect the national identities of its member states, inherent in their fundamental political and constitutional structure. This is not a formality, but a reminder that integration is built on consent, not coercion. In external oversight ignores this principle, it risks turning partnership of equal into a hierarchy of supervision. We see this tension in current rule of law debates, where the language of protection can sometimes becomes one of pressure. The question is not whether external control should exist. It must, but how far should go? When does legitimate concern become interference with constitutional identity? As the Venice Commission notes, the rule of law cannot be imposed. It must be anchored in each nation's constitutional culture. Defending sovereignty, therefore, does not mean rejecting accountability. It means ensuring that external mechanisms remain supportive, not substitutive of the constitutional will of the people. In the end, Europe's stand lies on not in uniformity, but in mutual respect of Europe of nations, bound by treaties, yet free in their constitutional soul. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insight, and we are going to listen our third speakers from each team, who will present another perspective on our topic, so political use of rule of law narrative, and the question, to what extent has the rule of law become a political instrument in European debates? Can invoking the rule of law sometimes serve legitimize actions that go beyond legal neutrality? So Polish team, please begin.
Thank you so much, Julia. Dear professors, dear guests, dear students. In recent years, the concept of the rule of law has become one of the key elements of Europe's political debate. Although it was originally meant to describe a neutral principle requiring member states to follow the law and guarantee the independence of institutions, in practice, it's increasingly becoming a political tool. On the one hand, referring to the rule of law is necessary. The European Union is built on shared values such as the separation of powers, judicial independence, and respect for human rights. When a member state violates these principles, EU institutions have a duty to respond also to protect the cohesion of the entire community. In this context, speaking about the rule of law serves a protective function. On the other hand, the rule of law narrative is sometimes used strategically. States and political parties may use it as argument in domestic or international disputes to strengthen their positions or discredit opponents. Similarly, states accused of violating the rule of law sometimes argue that the accusations are political rather than legal. This shows that the discussion about the rule of law itself has become an area for disputes over power, competences, and interpretation of European values. As a result, the rule of law remains both a foundation as a subject of political struggle. It can strengthen the legitimacy of actions when it's based on clear criteria and independent assessment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your perspective, and Central European team, you may now respond.
Thank you. Once again, dear opponents, dear professors, dear audience, although frequently evoked, the term rule of law has, over recent decades, evolved from a legal concept into a vague and often politicized slogan. We may dare to say that there is a weaponization of the rule of law concept as a political instrument, stripping it of its normative substance and transforming it into a contested narrative used strategically by competing political actors. Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union enshrines the rule of law as a founding value, yet member states fundamentally disagree on its meaning and application. Without shared normative understanding, these values cannot be effectively endorsed. As the rule of law is not a set of universally applicable objective criteria, it lacks well-defined rules and is subject of much debate. Some argue that the rule of law should pay greater respect to the specifics of member states and should not try to impose an artificial one-size-fits-all framework. This position has been contested by some scholars who argue that the core meaning of the rule of law has been clearly established through the Venice Commission report and subsequent case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union. The debate thus centers not on whether the shared standards exist, but on whether the EU has competence and legitimacy to enforce them. Political use of the rule of law narrative operates as a double-edged sword. On one hand, the European Union can use the rule of law as a political instrument, applying it to justify restrictions on funding and to enforce its vision of democracy. But also, on the other hand, member states can also use the rule of law as a political instrument through what scholars call abusive constitutionalism, the use of formally legal procedures to undermine democratic substance. In essence, it means dismantling democracy under the mask of legality by weakening independent institutions, especially courts and elections, while invoking sovereignty as a shield against European Union intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your analysis. So we now come to our fourth speakers from each team who will address the final aspect of this part of the debate. So global accountability and the international response to constitutional breakdown. And the question, how should the international community react when constitutional mechanisms are misused internally? Can external measures restore democracy or do they risk deepening internal divisions? So Polish team, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear professors, dear opponents, dear audience. The issue of global responsibility and international response to the collapse of constitutional order is one of the most complex dilemmas in contemporary politics. On the one hand, we have the fundamental principle of state independence and non-interference in internal affairs. On the other, we have the international community, including organizations such United Nations and regional blocs committed to defending and promoting democratic values and human rights. When constitutional mechanisms are systematically abused, not through sudden coup d'etat, but through slow erosion of norms, a response becomes a moral imperative. Sanctions, while capable of hitting the elites, often hit ordinary citizens first and hardest, deepening poverty and giving autocrats an excuse to consolidate power through extreme propaganda, which only deepens internal divisions. The external response should focus on targeted sanctions aimed directly at those responsible for abuses, while actively supporting internal civil society, such as independent media and non-governmental organizations. It is internal democratic forces that must be the main driver of change, for example, through elections. Only by combining external pressure with internal legality is there a chance of permanently restoring constitutional order while avoiding a deepening humanitarian and political crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And Central European team, please present your perspective.
Thank you, Julia. Dear opponents, dear professors, dear colleagues. One of the main goals of international law has been the protection of individuals from the misdemeanors of the national institutions, especially when it comes to the protection of human rights. The role of the international organizations is to hold the national states accountable for their actions taken while governing and to react when the national institutions infringe on human rights and the constitutional provisions in general. Numerous international organizations are examples of this, such as the International Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, etc. However, in the lack of strong mechanisms, these institutions struggle to implement their decisions effectively and to punish the national institutions for their misdemeanors. On the other hand, the question of the accountability of the international organizations becomes more and more interesting. The international organizations have significant competencies, and they are headed by individuals who are not directly elected by the people, therefore hard to hold accountable for their actions. In the EU, the European Commission is the main policy-making institution, but it is not directly elected by the Europeans. The institutions of the Union are often criticized for their democratic deficit, which somehow means that they are not sufficiently accountable. If the international organizations are unaccountable, it is questionable if their sanctions towards the national institutions are justified and unbiased, and if they fulfill their theoretical role. Unfortunately, there are many examples that claim the opposite. Therefore, besides the need for an international response to the constitutional breakdown, it is of high importance to actualize the question of the accountability of the international and regional organizations. In the globalist era in which democracy is often mentioned as an inviolable principle, and when most of the policies are created by international and regional actors, it is unacceptable that these institutions lack accountability. Improvement of the accountability of the international and regional organizations is something that has to be discussed more frequently. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive analysis, and thank you both teams for this final set of presentation in part 2. So we have now heard a wide range of perspectives on the European and international dimensions of accountability, each offering valuable insights into the complex relationship between state sovereignty, external oversight, and the protection of the rule of law. We will now move into the interactive segment, during which the teams may once again address questions to one another. In accordance with the order of rotation, for the second part, we will begin with the Polish team, who may now pose their question to Central European team. So, Polish team, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. So, dear opponents, if external bodies can hold national institutions accountable for the rule of law standards, should there also exist any kind of mechanisms to ensure accountability of those external actors themselves? And if so, what forms of oversight could meaningfully balance this relationship without undermining the effectiveness of international rule of law protection?
Thank you very much for this interesting question. If external actors can hold national institutions accountable for the rule of law, then they themselves must also be subject to meaningful oversight. Accountability cannot flow in only one direction. Otherwise, it risks transforming legitimate supervision into political pressure. To preserve both sovereignty and the credibility of international monitoring, external bodies must operate under clear, transparent, and reviewable procedure. Judicial review must remain available to ensure that external actors do not exceed their treaty-based mandates, such as safeguards do not undermine external oversight. A balanced system protects the rule of law in both levels by ensuring that national governments remain accountable and that those who monitor them remain accountable as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful answer. So we now turn to the Central European team, who may address the question to the Polish team.
So in theory, the external intervention from the international and regional organization improve the accountability of the national institutions. And are the international organization, and especially the EU, improving the accountability of the national institutions? And are they unbiased in their actions? And is the EU treating its member states equally in this matter?
Thank you for this question. So, the external intervention from both international or local organizations is often presented as something that automatically improves accountability. But in practice, this situation is more complicated because these institutions sometimes act without taking into account the key principles written into national constitutions. So when this happens, it can weaken state sovereignty and create conflicts between domestic and supranational systems of accountability. So the most important issue is the growing assumptions that EU law or decisions of international bodies should always take priority over constitutional norms, regardless of a country's constitutional identity. This can create legal tension, but also a democratic problem. National institutions are directly accountable to citizens, and supranational ones are not. And yet they may significantly influence how domestic constitutional organs operate. Another concern is consistency, because not all member states are treated in the same way. In similar situations, some are confronted very strongly, while others face much softer reactions. So this inconsistency undermines trust and raises doubts about whether decisions are always based on objective standards rather than political considerations. So as a result, external oversight doesn't always strengthen accountability. Sometimes it creates new problems, especially when it interferes with areas that, according to the Constitution, belong strictly to the national level. International cooperation is of course important, but it must respect national constitutional limits and apply the same rules to all states, and also operate with transparency. Without this, external mechanisms risk becoming a source of imbalance rather than a real support for the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your contribution. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the conclusion of this year's Oxford debate, I would like to take a moment to reflect on what we have witnessed today. So, both teams have engaged in remarkable, thoughtful, and intellectual rich discussion, navigating complex questions of constitutional responsibility, democratic oversight, and the evolving role of European and international institutions in safeguarding the rule of law. Your presentations, arguments, and responses demonstrate not only academic excellence, but also a deep commitment to dialogue and mutual understanding, values that lie at the heart of the university and the, of course, Oxford debate tradition. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to heads of both teams, Professor Janos Edesiladzi and Professor Marcin Wielec, for their guidance, leadership, and dedication to their students' academic development. Your support is visible in every contribution we heard today. Standing here at the university where my own academic path began, it has been an honor to return in the role of moderator and to witness such inspiring engagement from both teams. Today's debate has shown that even the most challenging questions can be approached with the clarity, respect, and intellectual openness. Although debates often invite comparison, in discussion of this nature, there are no winners and losers. So instead, we all live enriched with new perspective, deeper understanding, and renewed appreciation of how vital accountability is to the resilience of our constitutional systems. So thank you all for your presence, your attention, and your contribution to this remarkable event. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the Oxford Debate 2025. Thank you all and wish you a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
So, dear students, and thank you very much for you attending for this in this very beautiful Oxford debate. I'm proud of you, and we will meet in public organs in enforcement body in the next semester, in the first year of your studies. And so I joined to this beautiful wishes from Julia. Julia is graduated at our university and now is doctoral student in Central European Academy. And so again, I thank you both teams, especially in the captain, my friend, Janos Edesiladzi. Thank you very much. Let's get the applause. And so we prepared a little bit of gifts for our guests, for students. And please, so let's get the pack. Przesuniemy tą ściankę, nie? To już kieruję. Poczekajcie, jeszcze pamiętacie jak? Zofia. In Poland, Zofia. Mr. Bojan Petrowski. Faustyna Zabielska from Poland. Mateusz Kazanowski. Szymon Bizior. Weronika Pietras from Poland, but in the Central Europe. Mateusz Wrban.
Last but not least.
Last but not least, Wiktoria Zwolińska. Last but not least, the leader, the captain of the team. Thank you, it's over. Ej, może zdjęcie zrobimy. Zdjęcie. To zdjęcie to może nie tak, ale to za chwileczkę. A to już chyba nie ma znaczenia. Nie? Tak. Chodźcie, mi się wydaje, że tu, Wika, chyba to przesuniemy, nie? Dobra. Będzie, chodźcie. Mateusz, to solo, nie? A, no to tego chodźcie, come to me, come to me. What's the impression, Sofia? It's okay?
Yeah.
So a little bit of stress? It's
Yes,
of course, it's normal. Yeah, it's normal. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, no. Nice. And today, I recommend you visiting the Rosso.
Oh, yesterday actually we had quite
Yes?
nice sightseeing. Yeah.
Yeah.
We walked a lot.
Guys,
Yeah, come.
and then, Kasia, to the legendary photo. Maybe on the... Yes, sir. On the left? Okay. Oh my goodness, you have a crazy day. Yeah. Okay.
I do my
Very important.
Yeah.
Yes. In cathedral. In the cathedral. Yeah. Okay. In our library. Yeah. Because you know, if you good, I think I could remember in this camp is only part of this university. The main director is yeah. Really? It's okay. Yes, yes. So I'm impressive. Slowly, so I observe.
Jak było? Lepiej niż na Co? Oni właśnie nie widzieli tego potem, zaczęłam to, bo oni właśnie tak nie wiedzieli, co idzie. No nie, ja też od razu podeszłam. Tak, tak się zabawa. Nie, fajnie było, fajnie. I wydaje mi się, że im też się podobało. Spoko. Nie, ja jestem na trzecim roku, więc ja tam nie muszę codziennie pamiętać. Przez 2 tygodnie w biurze. Tak, a resztę sobie mogę pracować z domu. Więc jest fajnie. No oni są dopiero na pierwszym roku, więc oni mają te wszystkie obowiązki, które ja na przykład z konstem.
Not yet, but slowly, slowly. Yeah, it's...
Oh my God, this is my second debate, and I feel it was very, very good.
Before I'm calling back, may I ask you something? Because
Yeah, okay. In the 11 we have yes, yes, in the
Yesterday we were staying 5 hours. We were walking and sightseeing, and
She's really good now, but she still has a lot more
to show you. Yeah.
So expectations are really high.
Really high, yes, as usual.
As usual.
Yeah, because I have to ask them about this conference. Because tomorrow we are present the conference. Yeah. Oh, what?
I think the lunch starting maybe 50 minutes. We are going to visit it. And I'm really glad. I think it was a really good team. Thank you so much. Also the organizing competition. I think was selected. I really enjoyed your talks, and I think it was highly powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate your words. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Bo nikt wiesz, nawet nie wie, co oni. Bo nie mogę się zaczynać, nie wiem.
There's no statistic. Okay.
So like, maybe signal what?
You don't maybe you're already married.
Probably from seaside, right?
Probably he did.
Do you remember the name? Chio, yeah. Ah, okay, okay.
Slovenia now brought the tourists from Croatia.
Croatia is like crazy.
Yeah.
Albania is much.
Yeah, yeah. I was times in Albania, and to be honest,
I mean, for the price that we want, like 8 years ago, but they're developing.
it's very dirty.
But you should have in mind that they were the most undeveloped country in the Balkans about like 20 years ago. And now they did really great.
Yeah, sure.
Because they have really much investments from that.
Yeah, sure. But the hotels are good, better year after year. But to be honest, I think
Where were you?
in Albania I was in Durrës. So I think that the citizens of Albania are not ready for tourists. Something like that. They are still living in their whole life, yeah? And you know, they don't need special treatment as a tourist, yeah? But I think it's quite specific still for them that the tourists are available. So
You still need certain type of hospitality.
yeah, in Croatia got it, yeah.
Okay, guys, Tomek said that we should slowly go.
Okay.
You can leave our stuff here. Okay. But maybe I will just very, very small.
By the way, Durrës is a port city. That's why definitely the reason why I was saying it's dirty.
Bo ja mogę być, trzeba być poza tym. Nie, spokojnie.
The ultimate medicament.
Nie, to będzie tak. Będzie fajne, ale na luz.
Teraz? No dobrze, no niech pisze, no. Powodzenia.
No i co?
Me neither.
Proszę tutaj, proszę.
You can leave it here.
Jak tam aplikacja? Panie aplikancie. Panie profesorze, my zostawiamy sobie te rzeczy, czy mamy je zabrać ze sobą? Może weź. Okej.
To są, czekaj, nie, Wiktoria. Wiktoria sobie nie.
Moje życie jest na właściwym torze. Potem dyscypliny się kończą, oczywiście pomyślnie, prawda? Ale to po prostu wszystko bardziej skomplikowane. Już nie ma takich jasnych, wytycznych. Tak, jak wygodzić ze sobą, żeby się po prostu kończą się studia i jakby co ze sobą począć. To można pytanie sobie
Co zrobić? Jeszcze raz. Daniel, bardzo dziękuję, wszystko było w porządku.
Wielka przyjemność było spotkać. Do zobaczenia na wydziale.